Fantasy is home to some of the largest worlds ever created. Likewise, its cousin science fiction brings us entirely new worlds and new people to explore. Yet, for all the grand design that goes into the creation of these worlds, there is painfully little that breaks free of the hero's journey. Let's broaden our horizons and see how fantasy plays nice with other genres. I'm author DC Fergerson, and this is the Worldbuilding Dojo. Before we get started, let me talk to you authors out there. If you're just getting started, you're looking to build a newsletter subscription or grow your fan base, well, the Art of the Arcane is offering managed promotion services through BookFunnel. You get a BookFunnel membership and management of your newsletter to build out your subscribers, and all you need to do is just stay in touch with them. I'm using it myself, and I have a link in the description below if you'd like to try it out. I'm pretty sure that this video is going to fall into one of two camps. People that are excited to broaden their minds and see what they can come up with, and a bunch of folks that have a work in progress that they're very upset I interrupted by making them think of a new idea. To both camps, I'm super happy for you. I can relate to your thrill and your pain. For example, I have a horror book that's been stewing in my noodle for over a year, and a sci-fi comedy, but I first have to finish the Dragon's Dream saga this year, and then the Wicked Instruments next year, so who knows when I can get to those. That said, this video will be absolutely loaded with incidental writing prompts, but more than that, it'll get your mind turning about even more possibilities I may never have even thought of. To me, that's one of the greatest gifts I can give you. If I can prompt your next bestseller, or the tale you gather around your kitchen table to tell your friends, then I'd like to think I've done what I set out to do with the Worldbuilding Dojo. So, let's get into it. Why is it that fantasy has so often been confined to such a narrow range of stories? Well, for a lot of us, the landscape of fantasy has always been doing heroes' journeys. When you see something that's working, you don't reinvent the wheel, right? Well, that kind of circular logic is, I think, the reason for so little variation in sci-fi and fantasy worlds. I mean, let's be honest here. If you put Firefly, The Matrix, and Star Wars next to each other, it'd be easy to say that the one that isn't like the others is probably Star Wars, having more in common with fantasy and magic than sci-fi like Matrix and Firefly. The thing is, though, The Matrix and Star Wars actually have far more common structurally with the classic hero's journey and the way their tales unfold, their overarching themes, and even their protagonists. Firefly, which was modeled to be a western set in space, is totally different, and a big part of its appeal and mystique isn't just around the fact that it got canceled too early. It's the fact that it showed that even the most bitter, jaded, and veteran of sci-fi fans out there could still see that there was new ground to break in the genre. So let's explore some different genres and expand our minds, shall we? Instead of making a strong case for every genre that's out there, let's just assume right from the get-go that anything you can come up with is fair game. But DC, surely there are exceptions. No, guy who talks to your monitor, for once there are not. If somebody can make Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and have it be a half-decent popcorn movie, then I'd say all bets are off. That said, I would hope a lot of you out there wouldn't be so lazy as to literally copy half of an original story and the entire main cast, then basically fan fiction the rest of it. Come on, we're better than that. The thing that's so wonderful about getting our minds going in this direction, though, isn't that we have to be specific at all. If you say something general like, I want to write a romance in a sci-fi world, then I hope you make the notebook of bestsellers. The sky's the limit. We can even get really narrow into the niche genres. Imagine for a second a fantasy inspired by biker culture like Sons of Anarchy, but set in a world where instead of motorcycles, the gang is a group of griffin riders. Chased by the King's Guard, they hide their base in a sky fortress on a mountain only the griffins can reach. When the king commissions the first airship, he immediately sets his sights on our anti-heroes. That sounds cool as hell. The fact is, we've seen fantasy make storyline moves toward breaking new ground before, but inevitably, they pull the rug out from under these storylines and go the cheap, predictable route. I remember distinctly when I was sitting in the theater during The Last Jedi, and right here, during this scene, I genuinely believed that they were setting up for a possible side switch where Kylo Ren and Rey would switch sides, and I remember thinking, how daring would that be to switch the protagonist and the shadow midway through the trilogy? How many times have we seen the old wise mentor die to the shadow? Why can't we tell a story like The Dark Knight Returns, where the once peerless knight is dragged out of retirement and it's his story? Sure, we're writing an old man that has no business swinging a sword and his hips ache all the time from riding his horse for so many years, but that's also part of the appeal. There's this Toby Keith song. I'm not much of a fan of country, but music should always be a powerful influence for you. And I distinctly remember this one lyric: I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. That concept is amazing for an aging hero like this. The point we're getting at is how we pair with genres and determine the story that we want to tell can map out the story for us in some cases. Let's say that we wanted to go really far out there. Like, let's say we wanted to have noir influences in a crime story set in medieval times. Well, my friend, let me introduce you to a deep cut. The 1986 Sean Connery film The Name of the Rose. Now, this film follows William of Baskerville, a Franciscan friar, as he tries to solve the death of a monk in an abbey. The reason I bring this up is that it illustrates the framework for how this could be done in a fantasy setting. Instead of a Franciscan friar, William could easily be a mage hunter, brought in to investigate a murder at a wizard's tower. Hated by the same people he's brought in to help, he meets resistance every step of his investigation because they'd rather see one of their own running amok killing other mages than to assist a mage hunter in killing another one of their kind. And all of that is before we start drawing parallels to the crimes, akin to the film Seven, where the killer's motive is based on sacred texts. Are you starting to see how deep this rabbit hole goes? Inevitably, when we're formulating our tales, we're often going to be drawn to the best examples we've ever seen as the gold standard for inspiration. Having a huge well of book and film knowledge to draw from makes your library a constant inspiration. For example, when I conceived of the Pendragon Codex for the Dragon's Dream Saga Book 3, I had two competing narratives that I wanted to tell. That of the protagonist Cora joining a much larger group of people with powers like her, and also the threat of the big bad having a prisoner that they needed to free in a highly secure facility. So, for the team building aspects of the story, I took great team building superhero movies like The Avengers and Guardians of the Galaxy, while for the prison break aspect of the story, I was using great heist films like Ocean's 11, Heat, and The Italian Job. These films sit at the top of a lot of lists where they're peerless in their genre, but between them, they share a lot of important beats that make them so great. Seeing those beats and emulating that formula is only part of it, though. You need to twist and mold these concepts as your own. You need to bend them to your story's will, not be a slave to it. And that brings us to a little mental exercise. It's important to conceive of your own original ideas that branch out and grow, taking on a life of their own. But it is equally important that you understand your audience, as they have separate expectations altogether. If you walk into the romance section of the bookstore and talk to the people standing there about your great new romance, featuring a lengthy emphasis on gunplay with laser pistols on Space Station Gamma 12, you might drum up one person that's willing to try it. The others are going to look at you like you're the three-eyed alien that attacks our space station in Act 3. So keep that in mind and don't learn the hard way that I did. If I'm going to be brutally honest about my own failures here, the Wicked Instruments series were the first books I ever wrote when I became an indie author. I thought it'd be easy to market comedy to fantasy fans because, I mean, come on, we all love Hitchhiker's Guide and The Princess Bride, two huge influences on that series. As it would turn out, I found it incredibly difficult. I wasn't epic enough for high fantasy, and I wasn't as humorous as fans of, say, Discworld would have preferred. So I ended up in this weird middle where I was trying to find an audience that liked a laugh but also a cohesive narrative set in a fantasy world amid a sea of very serious authors lauded for deep magic systems. That proved more difficult than I ever imagined, and it forced me to put the series on hiatus while I moved over to what I felt was a more marketable urban fantasy series that I wanted to write. With years of experience now under my belt, I understand marketing a bit better, and I'll move toward fixing the Wicked Instruments to be more like it should next year. So, I hope that advice saves you 2 years of confusion and second-guessing yourself, and we can work toward this cool exercise. What I want you to do is to take your favorite piece of non-fantasy or non-sci-fi, and let's move it into that realm for an entirely new story. Since I mentioned it last week, I'm going to go with Of Mice and Men. Now, we're not trying to copy the story at all, although as we discussed earlier, that can obviously work. Instead, we want to tell a new narrative, perhaps with a lot of the same themes and beats, but we're bringing in our own fantasy elements, we're building a world around them that differs from our own, and most importantly, the original work. So, with Of Mice and Men, of course, we have our leads, George and Lenny, but instead of having Lenny being mentally handicapped, let's change him. Let's make him like a changeling or a doppelganger. Instead of George caring for him due to a promise to his dying aunt, let's say Lenny saved George's life a few years ago back in a war. Both of them are now vagabonds looking for work in a post-war kingdom that saw humans devastate the non-human world in the March of Progress. I'd be willing to bet you can already start to see where I'm going with this. So, our antagonist bully, the Curly of the story, is the village elder's son, a wannabe monster hunter that looks down on the motley bunch of people working for his father. The character of Crooks, our marginalized stable hand, can be changed, and I think I'm kind of torn between which way I'd want to go. My thoughts are between two different extremes: a powerful, aging orc with nagging injuries from the war, or the frail and fragile fairy with maybe a broken wing. Either way, their wisdom and education is wasted as they're shunned by their fellow workers because they're different. Now, we aren't bound to tell the story that Of Mice and Men told, so I say we abandon the theme and the tragic ending in favor of breaking new ground. Still in step with the genre of drama, I think I'd rather focus on the axiom of don't judge a book by its cover and show these amazing fantasy characters as people. The centaur is not a mythological creature here. Instead, he's a person named Kent, and he's forced into servitude as a wage slave for a world humans made that holds food hostage for currency. Crooks is a brilliant orc tactician that would be a general in any army he shows his prowess to, but the King's Guard would rather see him waste away on a farm than ever admit that their former enemy has anything to offer them. And at the heart of this story, George protects the world from Lenny, because if they ever knew he wasn't human, they'd hunt him down like the rest and try to break him. When the elder son catches wind of this, all hell breaks loose and George and Lenny run for it. In a desperate bid to return his life debt, George sacrifices himself for Lenny to get away, showing that humans have a lot to learn, but their capacity for love and loyalty means there may be hope for them yet. You see what I'm doing here? I just spitballed that together, and there's actually a lot of meat on that bone. Keep in mind, Of Mice and Men was a novella, not even a whole novel, and we've got so much to work with there. Also, abandoning the theme and the ending opened us up to the kind of storytelling I wanted to tell, not being a slave to the story that inspired it, and divergent enough that when it's actually fleshed out, it differs significantly from its inspiration to become a story that stands on its own. So what about you? Did you find your inspiration? Did I give you a writing prompt for something intriguing you might want to explore? I certainly hope so. Who knows? It could just be the next bestseller. The thing that is so wonderful about fantasy and sci-fi is that it can adhere to all of the expectations and tropes of its own genre, or it can simply act as a setting to tell a story in any other genre that you want, whether it's steampunk romance or a version of Dr. House in space. The sky's the limit. Just make sure that you know what your audience has in their expectations so that you don't have a story so alien to them that it can't rise above the noise in your genre. Once again, I have to thank you guys so much. We are 50% of the way through our donations. We're still working with the Boston-based Needs organization to get this beautiful lady a service dog. Her name is Liana. She's 11 and on the spectrum. And this wonderful person is my little girl. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter. The link is also in the comments, and you're going to get Cora Blake, Arcane Agent, totally free. You get cool news about what I'm working on in books and here on the channel, and it comes loaded with cool authors and promotions for fantasy and sci-fi. It's now going out twice a month on the 5th and the 19th, so definitely get yourself signed up. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos. And, as always, I'm DC Fergerson. Now have fun and get crafting.